Rosa was a quiet woman who worked very hard. She didn't wear nice clothes or makeup. Her hands were always rough from scrubbing floors, and she came home every day with tired feet. But she never complained. She had one reason to keep going: her daughter, Clara. Rosa wanted Clara to have a better life, one with books, beauty, and music, not mops and buckets. Rosa worked as a cleaner at a large music conservatory. It was a beautiful building with tall ceilings, red carpets, and rooms filled with grand pianos and violins. Famous teachers came there, and students from rich families paid a lot of money to learn music. Rosa had never played an instrument in her life, but she loved walking through the halls. Every time a violin cried or a piano sang, Rosa paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and smiled. Music made her forget about her aching back, even just for a second. Clara was only 11, full of curiosity and quiet dreams. She had big eyes and a thoughtful face, like she was always thinking about something deep. Rosa couldn't afford a babysitter, so she took Clara with her to work after school. The girl would sit on a bench outside the practice rooms with her books or sketchpad while her mother cleaned. Clara didn't talk much, but she listened. She listened better than anyone at first. No one noticed her. She was just the cleaner's daughter, sitting still in the hallway. She didn't speak to the students, and the teachers didn't even glance at her. But while others ignored her, Clara was watching everything. Eyes followed the pianist's fingers. Her ears caught every mistake and every perfect note. She could feel the sadness in a slow piece and the joy in a fast one. The music wasn't just sound to her, it was a story, a world. Every day, Clara saw the same young woman practicing the same difficult song over and over. She missed some notes, got frustrated, and started again. Clara never got bored. She watched. Her hands saw where they moved quickly and where they hesitated. Sometimes, Clara would close her eyes and imagine herself sitting at the piano, playing the same song. She didn't know how to read music, but she remembered the sounds. They stayed in her mind like pictures. Rosa noticed her daughter's interest. Once, during a short break, she asked Clara, "Do you like the music?" Clara nodded, her eyes shining. "It feels like magic," she said. Rosa smiled sadly. She wished she could give her daughter music lessons, but they could barely pay for food and rent. The piano rooms were not for girls like Clara, or so she thought. One evening, it was raining outside. The city lights reflected in the puddles, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Rosa had a lot of extra work that day, so they stayed later than usual. Most students and teachers had already gone home. The conservatory felt quiet and empty. Clara sat alone in the hallway, her sketchpad on her lap, but her eyes were fixed on the piano room down the hall. The door was half open. She walked closer. There was a grand piano inside, shiny and black, with its lid open like a bird ready to fly. No one was there. Clara looked around. The building was silent, except for the soft sound of rain hitting the windows. Her heart beat fast. She stepped inside, like someone entering a secret place. She had never touched a piano before. Her mother always said not to bother the instruments. But now, standing in front of it, Clara couldn't resist. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Slowly, carefully, she pressed one. It was a soft, sweet sound, like a whisper. Oh, then she pressed another, then another, trying to remember the melody she heard every day. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. Very close. In that moment, something changed. Clara wasn't just a quiet girl sitting in the hallway anymore. She was a part of the music. She closed her eyes and played more, guessing the notes, letting her ears guide her. Her hands moved like she had done this 100 times before. In truth, she had just in her mind, back in the other room. Rosa was still mopping the floor, not knowing that her daughter was about to change both their lives forever. That night started like any other. Cleaner, and her daughter finishing. Another long, quiet shift, but something magical had begun. Clara had touched the keys, and the keys had answered. What no one knew yet was that a gift had been waiting, sleeping inside her all this time. Just waiting for the right moment to be heard. Clara continued to visit the music conservatory with her mother every evening. She would sit quietly outside the practice rooms while her mother cleaned the hallways, bathrooms, and classrooms. People walked past her every day, students in expensive clothes carrying music sheets, teachers with serious faces and fancy shoes, and even visitors who came to listen to small concerts. But no one ever stopped to talk to Clara. To them, she was just the cleaner's daughter, a quiet girl with a sketch pad and worn-out shoes. But what they didn't know was that Clara was learning more than anyone else in that building. She wasn't just sitting there wasting time. She was watching, listening, and remembering everything. The sounds of the piano, the movement of fingers, the mistakes students made, and the advice given by teachers, all of it stayed in her sharp little mind. Sometimes she would sit near the large room where orchestra rehearsals took place. The room would be filled with music, violins, flutes, cellos, and pianos playing together. Clara would close her eyes and try to pick out each instrument from the sound. "That's a violin," she would whisper to herself. "Now the piano is coming in. The flute is flying like a bird above it." Her imagination turned every sound into a story. There was one room she loved most, a room with a grand piano and wide windows that let in the golden light of the sunset. A tall boy named Adrian used that room to practice. He was preparing for a competition, and he came almost every day. He played the same song again and again, sometimes getting angry when he hit the wrong notes. He would sigh, shake his head, and try again. Clara watched him with great interest. Even though she had never spoken to Adrian, she knew his routine by heart. He always placed his music sheet to the left, fixed the piano bench, cracked his fingers, and took a deep breath before he played. Clara didn't understand music notes, but she remembered the rhythm and the sound of each section. She noticed how Adrian slowed down during the hard parts and smiled when he finished a section without mistakes. It was like watching a dancer learn steps. Every move had meaning. Sometimes Clara imagined herself in his place. She dreamed of sitting at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys like his. She pictured the sound filling the room, soft at first, then strong and full. But she never said anything to her mother. She didn't want to ask for the impossible. They couldn't even afford a music book, let alone a piano lesson. Clara's ears became her teacher. She trained herself by listening. She learned when a note was too loud, when a tempo was too fast, or when something just didn't sound right. If a student played the same piece in a different way, she would notice the change. Sometimes she even imagined how she would change it herself, how she would slow it down or play it with more feeling. Her mother, Rosa, began to notice something. One evening, as they walked home in the cold, Clara started humming a melody. Rosa turned to her and asked, "Where did you hear that?" Clara shrugged. "Adrian played it today, but I changed the ending," she said softly. Rosa was surprised. She didn't know Clara remembered the songs that clearly, or that she could hum them so perfectly. But still, Rosa said nothing. What could she say? She didn't want to give her daughter false hope. Rosa believed that the world didn't notice girls like Clara not unless they were born into money, or luck, or both. But Clara didn't need hope. She had curiosity. Every day, she listened more deeply. She sat closer to the doors, trying not to make a sound. She watched hand movements, how fingers curved or stretched. She noticed how pianists used their feet on the pedals to change the sound. All this she learned without a single lesson. She started drawing piano keys in her sketchpad, labeling them with the letters she heard students say: C, D, E, F. She drew hands above the keys and traced the patterns they followed. Her sketchpad, once full of flowers and stars, now held pages of imaginary music. While the students had teachers to guide them, Clara had only her eyes, her ears, and her heart. But she never felt jealous. In fact, she was thankful just to be near the music. It made her feel something big and beautiful inside. Like the world wasn't small or Parit, was full of color and sound and magic. Clara remained unnoticed by everyone in the conservatory. But in truth, she was the most attentive student of them all. She didn't need to speak or play to understand music. She understood it in a way that couldn't be taught, in a way that lived inside her. She was not just watching music. She was becoming it. One rainy evening, everything felt different. The sky outside was dark, and the rain tapped gently against the big windows of the conservatory. Most students had already gone home. The halls, usually filled with footsteps and music, were now quiet and empty. Rosa was still cleaning the upper floors, and Clara was sitting by herself near the piano rooms. Her sketchpad lay on her lap, but she wasn't drawing. Her eyes kept looking at one door, the door to her favorite piano room. The door was open. Just a little. Clara could see the black and white keys of the grand piano inside. The lights were still on, and the room was empty. Her heart began to beat faster. No one was there. No students. No teachers. Only the piano. Waiting, Clara stood up slowly. She looked around. The hallway was silent. She took a step forward. Then another. Her feet felt heavy, as if they knew this was something important. She reached the door and pushed it open gently. It didn't make a sound. The room felt warm and bright. The piano sat in the middle like a sleeping giant. She walked closer. Her fingers were shaking. She had never touched a piano before. Rosa always told her to be careful, not to touch the instruments, not to get in trouble. But now, something inside her was stronger than fear. It was a quiet voice telling her, try. Just try once. Clara stood in front of the piano and reached out her hand. Slowly, she pressed one key. A soft sound came out, clear and pure. It was only one note, but it made her smile. Then she pressed another key, and then another. She started playing. With both hands, copying the melody she had heard Adrian practice so many times. The notes weren't perfect, but they were close, very close. She didn't know the names of the keys. She didn't know how to read music, but her ears remembered the sounds. Her mind remembered the rhythm. Her heart remembered the feelings. She had listened for so long, day after day, that her fingers simply followed the memory. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her. Soon, her hands began to move faster. She wasn't just copying anymore. She was adding her own touches, playing the parts she remembered differently, softer in some places, stronger in others. She added feeling, as if she was telling her own story through the keys. The sound filled the room like sunshine pouring. Through the windows, Clara didn't notice how much time had passed. She didn't know that she was smiling, or that her whole body looked alive with joy. She felt like she had stepped into a dream. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her voice. Meanwhile, down the hallway, two famous pianists were visiting the conservatory. They had just finished a meeting with the head of the school and were on their way out. One of them had forgotten a music folder in the practice room and came back to get it. As they walked through the hallway, they stopped. A sound was coming from the piano room. A beautiful sound. The kind of music that made you stop walking and just listen. They looked at each other. Who's still practicing? One whispered. They moved closer and stood outside the door. What they saw shocked them inside. A young girl wearing simple clothes and no shoes was sitting at the piano, playing like she had trained for years. But she wasn't reading any music. There were no papers in front of her. Her eyes were closed, and her fingers were moving like magic. The music was deep and full of feeling. It wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. It made the two men feel something in their hearts. They didn't speak. They just watched. Back in the room, Clara finally finished the song. She opened her eyes and sighed, not knowing she had an audience. Then she saw them. She gasped and quickly stood up. Her heart jumped in fear. She thought she would be in trouble. "I'm sorry," she said softly, looking down. "I didn't mean to touch it." There was a long silence. Then one of the men clapped. Slowly. Then the other joined him. The sound of their hands filled the room. Clara looked up, confused. "Who taught you that?" One of them asked, his voice full of wonder. Clara answered in a small voice, "No one. I just listened." They looked at each other again, amazed. They had seen many talented students in their lives, but this was different. This girl had something rare, something you can't teach. In that quiet moment, something magical had happened. The cleaner's daughter, who had sat in the shadows for so long, had finally touched the light. And two pairs of eyes had seen what no one else had noticed. A hidden gift. A silent star ready to shine. Clara stood frozen near the piano, her hands still shaking. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had played the piano, really played it. To strangers had been watching her the whole time. These were not just ordinary people. She could tell by their clothes and the way they carried themselves that they were important. Their eyes were focused on her, not with anger, but with surprise. It's almost like they had just seen something unbelievable. One of the men took a slow step forward. He was tall, with silver hair and kind eyes. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain outside. "And who taught you to play like that?" The second man asked. He had glasses and carried a leather folder under his arm. Clara looked down at the floor. "No one," she said. "I just listened to the students. I watched them play. I remembered the sounds." The two men looked at each other, shocked. One of them sat slowly on a chair in the corner of the room, still staring at her. "That was remarkable," he said. "You played with emotion, like someone who has studied for years." Clara didn't know what to say. She had never been praised like this before. Her hands were still trembling, and her heart was beating too fast. She didn't know if she should run away or say thank you. She simply stood still, waiting. Just then, Rosa entered the hallway with a mop in her hand. She had come to look for Clara and was surprised to see her inside the piano room. Her eyes widened when she saw the two men with her daughter. Rosa hurried in, worried something had gone wrong. "I'm so sorry," Rosa said quickly. "She didn't mean to touch anything. Please forgive her." But the men didn't look upset. In fact, they smiled at Rosa. "Madam, your daughter is a special child," said the man with the silver hair. "She has a gift." Rosa looked confused. "Gift?" she asked, not understanding. She just played a piece with more feeling than many students we've trained, said the man with glasses. "And she says she's never had a lesson." Rosa looked at Clara, shocked. "You played?" she asked. Clara nodded slowly. Rosa didn't know what to think. She had always seen Clara watching and listening, but she had never imagined her daughter could play like this. She felt a mix of pride, surprise, and worry. Would they be angry? Would Clara get in trouble? But instead of trouble, something else happened. "Would you mind if we spoke to the school director?" asked the man politely. "We believe Clara deserves to be heard." Rosa hesitated. She had never spoken to the school director. To her, the conservatory was a place of rules, and she was only the cleaner. But the man's voice was calm and respectful. She nodded slowly. That evening, bed. Everything changed. The two men, both famous pianists visiting the conservatory, asked for a special meeting with the head of the school. They explained what they had seen and heard. They spoke about Clara's Natural gift, her ear for music, and the emotion in her playing. The director was surprised. The cleaner's daughter? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, said one of the musicians firmly. She may be the most talented student you've never taught. The next day, Clara was invited for a private audition. When Rosa told Clara the news, the young girl's eyes widened with fear and excitement. Me? But I'm not a student, she said. They want to hear you play, Rosa said gently. Brushing Clara's hair back with her fingers, just like last night. Be yourself. Clara had never been so nervous in her life. She wore her best clothes, plain dress and clean shoes, and followed her mother through the tall glass doors of the conservatory. They were led to a room where the director and a few music teachers waited, sitting in a row like judges. There were no music sheets, no teacher standing by. Just a piano and a girl with a heart full of music. Clara sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. She started to play. At first, the teachers looked surprised. Then, slowly, their expressions changed. Some leaned forward, others closed their eyes to listen. Clara's fingers danced over the keys, not perfectly, but with feeling. Every note told a story. She wasn't just repeating what she had heard, she was playing from inside, from her soul. When she finished, the room was silent for a few moments. Then came the sound of quiet applause. Soft, but full of respect. The director stood up and looked at Rosa. She has something rare. He said, we would like to offer her a scholarship. Full training, no fees. Rosa couldn't believe her ears. She held Clara's hand tightly, her eyes filling with tears. Clara had gone from sitting silently in the hallway to standing in the center of the stage, and it had all started because she dared to play, even when no one was watching. Clara sat at the piano, her heart beating like a drum inside her chest. The room was quiet, and all eyes were on her. In front of her sat the school director, 3 music teachers, and the 2 famous pianists who had discovered her the night. Before her mother, Rosa stood in the back corner of the room, nervous but proud, holding her cleaning gloves in one hand. Clara could feel the pressure, but she also felt something else, something warm inside her chest. Music. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first note was soft, almost like a whisper, but it quickly grew stronger. Clara didn't have sheet music. She didn't need it. Every note she played came from memory, from her heart, from all those hours she had spent quietly listening in the hallway. Her fingers moved naturally, as if they had always known the piano. At first, the teachers were surprised. They had not expected much. After all, Clara had never received formal training. But as she played, their surprise turned into silence. A deep, thoughtful silence. One teacher leaned forward. Another closed his eyes. The room was filled with music that felt real, full of emotion, not just sound. Clara didn't try to impress anyone. She simply let the music speak. Her small hands danced across the keys, telling a story that words could not. She played softly when the music was gentle, then added power when the feelings became strong. It was like watching someone paint a picture using only sound. When the final note rang out, Clara lifted her fingers slowly and looked up. No one spoke. The silence felt heavy. For a moment, Clara thought she had done something wrong. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe they didn't like it. Then, one of the pianists began to clap. The sound echoed through the room. Another joined in. Then the teachers. Even the director nodded slowly and smiled. Clara blinked, unsure what was happening. She had never received applause before. Not like this. The man with the silver hair stood up. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice full of emotion. "You played with heart. Not many people can do that, even after years of training." The director turned to Rosa, who stood with tears in her eyes. "Your daughter is very special," he said. "We want to give her a full scholarship. She can study here, lessons, books, everything she needs, free of cost." Rosa couldn't speak. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked at Clara, then at the people in the room. She had never dreamed of this. All she ever wanted was a simple, safe life for Clara. And now her daughter was being given a chance to step into a world that once felt far away. "Thank you," Rosa finally whispered, her voice shaking. Clara smiled shyly. She didn't fully understand how big this moment was, but she felt happy, like something inside her had just opened up. Word about Clara spread quickly. People in the conservatory began to whisper about the cleaner's daughter who played like a star. Some were curious, others doubtful. But when they heard her play, they stopped talking. The music said everything. Clara started attending regular classes. At first, she felt nervous and out of place. The other students wore fancy clothes and carried expensive instruments. Clara had second-hand shoes and no uniform. But when she sat at the piano, none of that mattered. The teachers noticed something strange. Clara picked up lessons faster than anyone. She didn't just memorize the notes, she felt them. She could play pieces after hearing them only once. She could change a song slightly to make it more emotional, more alive. One teacher told the class, "You can learn technique, but what Clara has, you are born with it." Her days of watching from the hallway were over. Now, Clara sat inside the rooms she had once only peeked into. She had her own seat, her own books, her own piano time. Rosa still worked as a cleaner, but she walked through the halls with her head held a little higher. Every time someone praised Clara, Rosa smiled quietly. Remembering the many nights she had mopped those same floors, never imagining that her daughter would one day fill those halls with music. Sometimes, Clara still felt like that quiet girl in the corner. But now, people saw her. They heard her. And most of all, they believed in her. It had all started with one moment, one night, one song. A girl who had never touched a piano before had sat down and played from the heart. And in doing so, she had changed her life forever. The next morning, the whole conservatory was buzzing with excitement. Whispers filled the hallways, and students kept asking each other the same question. "Did you hear about the cleaner's daughter?" Some students couldn't believe it. "How can a girl who never had a lesson play so well?" they said. Others were curious. A few were jealous. But no one could ignore the truth. Clara had something special. Something even the most trained students didn't always have. Clara came to school early that day, wearing her cleanest dress and carrying a second-hand bag with a few books the teachers had given her. She didn't walk with pride or show off. She just smiled softly and followed her mother through the same hallways she used to sit in silently. But this time, people looked at her with wide eyes. Not as a cleaner's daughter, but as someone important. A group of music teachers waited for Clara in the main office. One of them greeted her with a warm smile and said, "We are so happy to have you, Clara." Another teacher handed her a folder filled with music sheets and practice notes. Clara had never held such papers before. She looked at them like they were something magical. She was given a piano schedule. Every day, she would get her own practice time in one of the beautiful rooms with tall windows and grand pianos. A special teacher, Miss Alina, was chosen to guide her. Miss Alina was kind and soft-spoken, but also very serious about music. From the first day, she noticed that Clara didn't need to be taught everything. She learns like a sponge. Miss Alina told the director she hears, she understands, and then she plays. It's unbelievable. Even though Clara had a gift, she still had a lot to learn. She didn't know how to read sheet music very well, and she had never been taught the names of all the notes. Some students could read music faster than they could read words, but Clara had to work harder to catch up. Still, she never gave up. At night, after her mother finished work, they would go home. And Clara would sit with her music papers, slowly tracing the notes with her finger and humming the melodies. Rosa watched her daughter and often wiped away quiet tears. She had never imagined this life for Clara. She had cleaned the same floors for years. But now, something new had begun. Sometimes, Clara stayed late at the conservatory. Miss Elena would let her practice longer if the room was free. On one of those evenings, while Clara played a soft piece, a famous violinist from Europe was visiting the school. He was passing by the hallway when he heard her music. He stopped, closed his eyes, and stood there, listening. When Clara finished, he walked into the room and said, "Who is your teacher?" Clara stood up, a bit shy, and said, "Miss Elena." He smiled. "Tell her she is lucky to teach you." News about Clara reached people outside the conservatory too. A local newspaper wrote an article titled, "The Girl Who Learned from the Hallway." They talked about how a cleaner's daughter had amazed the best teachers in the school with her natural talent. One day, Clara was invited to play in a small student concert. She had never been on a stage before. She wore a simple white dress her mother had stitched from an old curtain. It wasn't fancy, but Clara looked beautiful. When she walked onto the stage, she saw many faces in the audience: teachers, students, even guests from the city. Her heart beat fast, but she remembered what her mother always told her. Play like it's your dream, not like it's a test. So Clara sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers speak. As the music filled the hall, people forgot she was the cleaner's daughter. They didn't see her background, or her old shoes, or her plain dress. They only heard the beauty of her heart in every note she played. When the last note faded, the room was silent. Then, slowly, the clapping began. Not just polite applause, but loud, warm, honest clapping from people who truly felt something. In their hearts, Rosa, sitting in the back row, covered her mouth to stop her tears. She had cleaned those floors for years, never asking for attention, never hoping for anything more. But now, her daughter stood on that same floor, not with a mop but with music, and in that moment, both mother and daughter rose higher than they had ever dreamed. Clara's life changed completely after that concert. People didn't see her as the cleaner's daughter anymore. They saw her as the girl who could make a piano sing. Every time she played, it felt like a new world opened up, a world full of emotions, dreams, and magic. Her days were now filled with music classes, piano practice, and lessons in music theory. She learned how to read notes properly, how to understand rhythms, and how to express different feelings through sound. Some things were hard for her at first, especially because she had never gone to music school before. But Clara was not afraid of hard work. She listened carefully, practiced for hours, and always asked questions when she didn't understand something. Her teacher, Miss Elena, was amazed. Clara doesn't just learn music. She told the director one day, she feels it. It's like it flows through her blood. At home, life was still simple. Rosa continued to work as a cleaner at the conservatory. Every evening after school, Clara and Rosa walked home together, holding hands. They would talk about Clara's classes and the new pieces she was learning. Rosa listened with joy in her heart, even though she didn't understand everything. About music, one day, Clara said, "Mama, I want to play a song for you, one that is only yours." She sat down at the small keyboard that had been donated by a kind teacher and began to play a soft, gentle tune. It was not loud or showy. It was simple and full of love. Rosa sat quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks. No one had ever played a song for her before. "You work so hard for me," Clara said after the music ended. "This is my thank you." Rosa hugged her daughter tightly. That moment meant more to her than anything in the world. At the conservatory, Clara's story continued to grow. She was invited to more student concerts. Her name started appearing on posters. She even gave a small radio interview where she talked about her journey. When the host asked her, "Who is your biggest inspiration?" Clara smiled and answered, "My mother." People began to recognize Rosa too. Students who once walked past her now greeted her with respect. Teachers who had never noticed her before now thanked her for raising such a gifted child. Rosa didn't care much about attention, but inside she felt proud. All those years of working silently, all those nights walking home in the cold now, it felt like it had a purpose. One afternoon, something special happened. Clara was asked to perform at the city's cultural event. It was a big stage, and many famous people would be there. Clara was nervous, but also excited. Miss Alina helped her choose a song. "Play something that speaks from your soul," she said. Clara practiced every day. She played until her fingers were sore, but she never gave up. Rosa watched her with love and worry. "Don't push yourself too hard," she would say. Clara just smiled. "It's not hard, Mama. It's my dream." On the night of the event, Clara wore a dress that had been gifted by one of the music families. Rosa sat in the front row, her heart pounding. She held a tissue in one hand and said a small prayer. When Clara walked on stage, the lights were bright and the hall was silent. She took her place at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music was soft at first, like the start of a quiet morning. Then it became stronger, full of emotion. She played every note like it was part of her story, her past. Her dreams, her love for her mother. People in the audience listened with wide eyes. Some closed their eyes, some wiped tears. The music reached into their hearts. It was not just a performance, it was a gift. When the last note ended, the hall stayed silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the magic. Then the applause came. Loud, long, and full of feeling. People stood up. They clapped, not just for talent, but for heart, for hard work. For the journey of a girl who had once only listened from the hallway. Rosa stood too, her eyes full of tears, her hands shaking. She looked at her daughter on the stage and thought, she has risen. Beyond everything. Beyond the dust, beyond the silence, beyond the world that once ignored her. That night, Clara and Rosa walked home together, hand in hand, as always. But now, the city lights felt brighter, and the world felt full of new possibilities. Clara had started her journey in the shadows, but now she was shining, and even though she had played on a big stage, with important people watching, her favorite part of the day was still the same: walking home beside her mother, the woman who had given her everything. Years passed, and Clara grew up into a beautiful, confident young woman. Her music had taken her to places she had only seen in pictures before: big cities, shiny concert halls, and even other countries. She had played on many great stages, in front of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people. Every time she sat at the piano, the room went quiet. The audience didn't just hear music, they felt it deep in their hearts. People called her a prodigy. Journalists wrote about her, and newspapers printed headlines like, "From the mop to the music, Clara's unbelievable journey, and the gifted girl who taught herself." Everyone wanted to interview her, to ask how she became such an amazing pianist without early lessons, without money, without any help in the beginning. But whenever they asked her, "Where did your journey start?" Clara always smiled and said, "It started in a cleaning bucket and a hallway where my mother worked, and I listened." She never forgot her roots. She never pretended to be someone else. She always remembered who she was and where she came from. She often spoke about Rosa in her interviews. "My mother is the real star," she would say. "She gave up her comfort, her dreams, everything for me. Without her, I would never have touched a piano. She didn't just clean the floors, I believe she cleaned a path for my future." Her words touched the hearts of many. Some people cried when they heard her story. especially mothers who knew what it meant to sacrifice for their children. Clara started giving free lessons to poor children in her free time. She visited small schools, shared her story, and encouraged children to believe in themselves. You don't need fancy clothes or a big house to dream, she would tell them. You only need a heart that listens and a spirit that doesn't give up. She also set up a music scholarship in her mother's name, the Rosa Foundation. The goal was simple: to help children from poor families learn music, just like she once wished for herself. The first time she gave a scholarship to a little girl from a village, she cried while handing her the letter. "This was me," she whispered to herself, "and now I can be someone's light." Back at home, Rosa still lived simply. She had stopped working as a cleaner, but she still kept the old mop in the corner of her kitchen. "It reminds me of how far we've come," she once told Clara with a smile. She spent most of her time in a small garden and sometimes traveled with Clara to her concerts. At every concert, Clara reserved the best seat for her mother. She didn't care who else was in the audience: famous musicians, reporters, or important guests. For her, the most important person was always Rosa. "If I play well," she once said, "it's because I can feel her smile even before I touch the first key." One rainy evening, much like the one from her childhood, Clara performed in a grand theater in Paris. It was a special night. The concert was being broadcast on TV and radio all over the world. People sat quietly, waiting for her to begin. Clara wore a long, simple white dress and walked slowly to the piano. Before she started, she took the microphone and said, "Before I play tonight, I want to tell you all something." The room went silent. "There was once a little girl who used to sit in the hallway of a music school," she said, her voice calm but full of emotion. She had no money, no teacher, no piano of her own. But she had a mother who worked day and night, and she had a dream that refused to die. Clara paused, then looked toward the front row where Rosa sat. "Mama, this one's for you," she said. She sat down at the piano and began to play. The music was soft at first, like a memory. Then it became stronger, filled with love and struggle, with hope and tears. Every note spoke of late nights, dusty shoes, hidden pain, and quiet bravery. It was not just a song. It was Clara's life in music. When she finished, the audience stood up. People clapped for a long time. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply stood in silence, too moved to speak. Rosa stood too, her hands shaking, her eyes wet with tears. She had watched her daughter grow from a small girl who quietly listened in the corners to a world-famous pianist who could touch hearts with a single note. That night, as they returned to their hotel, Rosa looked at Clara and said, "Do you remember the first time you touched a piano?" Clara smiled. "Yes, Mama. It felt like I was touching magic." Rosa nodded. "You were, and now you are the magic." Clara didn't answer. She just hugged her mother tightly. No words were needed, because some stories don't need to be explained. They just need to be felt, like music.